Some losses do not announce themselves. They happen quietly inside the mind. Years disappear while a person works, hopes, waits, yet the life they expected never forms. If your thoughts are unguarded, something else may already be shaping your future. Most people believe the greatest threats to their success come from the outside. Economic conditions, competition, bad timing, these explanations feel reasonable. They allow a person to point towards something visible and say, there is the obstacle. But there is a quieter force at work in every human life, a force that rarely receives attention. And it begins somewhere most people never think to examine, inside the stream of their own thoughts. Now pause there. Because the moment this idea appears, many people immediately dismiss it. They say thoughts are harmless, thoughts are private, thoughts cannot possibly determine the direction of an entire life. That belief is comforting, and it is precisely why so many remain stuck. The truth is far less comfortable. Your mind is not simply a place where ideas appear. It is a broadcasting station. Every repeated thought becomes a signal, and those signals shape decisions, expectations, and behavior in ways so subtle that most individuals never recognize the pattern forming. Successful individuals understand this early, often before they fully understand why. And because they understand it, they practice something most people never consider necessary. They guard their thoughts, not occasionally, constantly. But before you can understand why that discipline matters, something else must be seen clearly. The average person does not control their thinking. They experience it. Thoughts arrive in the morning. They continue during the day. They whisper during moments of uncertainty. And most people treat these thoughts as harmless background noise. But there is a problem hidden in that habit. The mind does not distinguish between a passing thought and a repeated belief. If an idea returns often enough, the subconscious begins accepting it as truth. And once the subconscious accepts something as truth, behavior quietly adjusts to match it. This is where the invisible chain begins forming. A person thinks repeatedly about limitation. They say things such as, I hope this works. People like me rarely succeed. I should probably be realistic. These statements appear small. They sound cautious, even responsible. But each repetition plants an instruction inside the subconscious mind. Lower expectation, reduce ambition, prepare for disappointment. The mind obeys these instructions faithfully. And then something strange happens. Opportunities appear, but hesitation follows. Ambitions rise, but doubt arrives immediately afterward. Plans are made, but procrastination begins creeping into action. From the outside, it appears that circumstances are interfering. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. The mind is simply obeying the instructions it has been given. Now consider something even more unsettling. Many people who work extremely hard remain trapped in the same results year after year, not because they lack effort, but because the direction of their thoughts quietly contradicts the direction of their work. They say they want success, but their internal dialogue repeatedly predicts failure. They say they desire independence, but their thinking constantly rehearses fear. This contradiction creates a silent conflict inside the mind, and when conflict exists, the subconscious chooses the belief that has been repeated the longest. That belief becomes the governing command. This is why Napoleon Hill spent so much time studying the mental habits of powerful builders of industry. He noticed something unusual about individuals such as Andrew Carnegie and Henry Ford. Their thinking was not left unattended. They were extremely selective about what ideas they allowed to occupy their minds, not because they were fragile, because they understood the mind's obedience. The mind obeys what it hears repeatedly, whether that instruction leads toward growth or limitation. Now here is the part that few people are willing to confront honestly. Most individuals are not careful about what they think. They allow the environment to supply their thoughts. News fills the mind with worry. Other people fill the mind with doubt. Past failures replay themselves quietly during moments of silence. And over time, the mind begins constructing an identity from these repeated messages. Not a deliberate identity, an accidental one, an identity shaped by unguarded thoughts. Once that identity forms, the person begins living inside its boundaries. They pursue opportunities that feel safe. They avoid risks that challenge the internal story they have built about themselves. And without realizing it, they begin drifting. Drifting does not mean laziness. A drifter may work tirelessly. A drifter may even appear ambitious. But drifting means something far more dangerous. It means the mind has never issued a final command about the direction of life. Without that command, thoughts wander, and wandering thoughts eventually invite wandering results. Now pause for a moment and consider a question that few people ask themselves directly. If thoughts truly shape the direction of behavior, then who has been guarding yours? Who has been deciding which ideas deserve repetition in your mind? Was it you, or was it circumstance, environment, habit? Because if those forces have been deciding for you, then something else must also be true. Your current results may not be the product of fate at all. They may simply be the predictable outcome of thoughts you never realized were shaping your future. This realization makes many people uncomfortable. It threatens an identity they have held for years. But those who build extraordinary lives confront it sooner or later. They recognize that success does not begin with opportunity. It begins with mental discipline. The discipline to guard the gateway through which every idea enters the mind. And that gateway is more vulnerable than most people realize, because the most dangerous thoughts rarely arrive as obvious enemies. They arrive disguised as normal thinking, reasonable thinking, practical thinking, but hidden inside those thoughts is a quiet influence capable of controlling ambition itself. Most people never meet that influence face to face, because it never announces its presence, yet it quietly determines whether your thinking moves toward power or toward limitation. And until that hidden enemy is recognized, guarding your thoughts becomes almost impossible, which raises a disturbing question. If successful individuals guard their thinking so carefully, what exactly are they protecting themselves from? There is a quiet enemy that lives inside the mind. It does not shout, it does not threaten. In fact, most people believe it is helping them. That is why it survives so easily, and that is why so many lives remain smaller than they were meant to be. Because the enemy is not lack of intelligence, it is not lack of opportunity, it is something far more ordinary, fear disguised as practicality. Now notice how subtle this is. Fear rarely enters the mind announcing itself. It does not say, "I will stop you from succeeding." Instead, it arrives wearing the voice of reason. Be careful. Do not risk too much. Maybe this is not the right time. Those thoughts sound responsible, wise, even mature, and so the mind accepts them without resistance. But something dangerous begins happening the moment those thoughts repeat often enough. They begin shaping your internal expectations, and expectations quietly determine behavior. A person who expects limitation behaves differently than a person who expects expansion. Not dramatically, subtly. They hesitate longer. They second-guess decisions. They delay action. From the outside, this behavior appears cautious, but underneath it is fear controlling direction. Napoleon Hill spent years identifying the hidden fears that govern human behavior. He discovered that most individuals are not stopped by circumstances, they are stopped by internal ghosts. Fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of failure. These fears rarely destroy ambition all at once. They erode it gradually, like water wearing down stone. Consider the fear of poverty. It whispers continuously. It reminds the mind that resources are limited. It suggests safety above ambition. And when this fear becomes dominant, the individual begins prioritizing security over growth. They choose the predictable path, the safe decision, the familiar environment, even when their deeper instincts whisper that they were meant for more. Now look carefully at what happens next, because this is where the pattern becomes dangerous. The mind begins searching for evidence to support the fear. If the person believes success is unlikely, they will notice every example of failure around them. If they believe opportunity is scarce, they will notice every obstacle confirming that belief. The mind becomes a collector of proof, proof that reinforces the fear already planted inside it. And once that proof accumulates, something troubling happens. The belief begins feeling like truth. Not an opinion, a certainty. Now consider the consequence. A person who believes opportunity is rare will behave cautiously. They will hesitate before bold action. They will question their own ability. They will postpone decisions. And each delay quietly strengthens the original belief. The law of cause and effect is operating with perfect consistency. Thought creates belief. Belief creates behavior. Behavior creates results. Results appear to confirm the belief. This cycle traps millions of hardworking people inside lives they never intended to build. Because they are not failing through lack of effort, they are failing through obedience to unguarded thoughts. Now this is where something else becomes visible. Fear rarely acts alone. It recruits an accomplice, procrastination. Most people believe procrastination is a time management problem. It is not. Procrastination is identity protection. When an action threatens the comfort of your current self-image, the mind delays it, quietly, respectfully. You tell yourself you need more preparation, more information, better conditions. But if you examine the situation honestly, something else is usually present. The action required would force you to become a different person. A person exposed to criticism, a person responsible for bigger results, a person no longer able to hide behind potential. And that transformation awakens fear. So the mind postpones the moment, not forever, just long enough for enthusiasm to fade. Then the opportunity disappears. The person explains the outcome with external reasons, but the truth remains hidden. Fear controlled the thinking. Thinking controlled the decision controlled the result, and the pattern continues. Now ask yourself something quietly. How many times has this happened in your own life? Moments when ambition rose clearly inside you, moments when opportunity appeared, moments when a bold decision was required, and then something subtle interrupted the momentum, a voice suggesting caution, delay, doubt. That voice felt reasonable, but afterward, the opportunity slowly disappeared. Most people never trace that pattern back to its origin. They believe the moment simply passed. But successful individuals study those moments carefully. They recognize something the average mind overlooks. Fear always begins as a thought, a single thought, repeated, strengthened, protected. And once that thought becomes belief, it begins controlling behavior without asking permission. This is why powerful individuals guard their thinking so aggressively, not because they are fragile, because they understand the enemy. They know that one repeated thought can grow into a belief capable of controlling an entire life, and they refuse to allow that belief to form without examination. Consider the discipline required for that kind of awareness. Every idea entering the mind must be questioned. Is this thought building power or reducing it? Is this thought strengthening purpose or weakening it? Is this thought expanding possibility or rehearsing fear? Most people never ask those questions. Their thinking runs automatically, influenced by environment, by past experiences, by the opinions of others. But the individuals who shape industries and nations rarely allow their minds to drift that way. Their thinking is deliberate, selective, guarded. because they know something the drifting mind never discovers. Your thoughts do not remain inside your mind. They eventually become the structure of your life. But here is where the confrontation becomes unavoidable. If fear enters through thought, procrastination protects the identity built by that fear. Then guarding your thoughts is not merely a mental exercise, it is the beginning of a complete transformation of identity. And that transformation demands something many people resist longer than they realize, a moment of absolute decision, a moment where drifting ends and direction begins. Most individuals approach that moment several times in their lives. You recognize it while it is happening, because when it arrives, it does not feel heroic. It feels uncomfortable, even frightening. Yet once that moment passes, the mind can never return to its former ignorance, because a deeper truth becomes visible. And when that truth becomes visible, excuses lose their power, which leads to a realization so unsettling that many people spend years avoiding it. The forces limiting your life may not be outside you at all. They may be the thoughts you have been allowing to remain unchallenged. And once that realization becomes unavoidable, something inside you begins to break. There comes a moment in a person's life when a certain illusion can no longer survive. For years, the mind has protected itself with explanations, bad luck, wrong timing, difficult circumstances. These explanations are comfortable. They soften disappointment. They allow a person to believe the future will improve once conditions change. But eventually something happens. The pattern becomes too clear to ignore. You begin noticing that effort alone has not produced the life you expected. You have worked, you have waited, you have hoped, yet the results remain strangely familiar, year after year. Not disastrous, but not the life you imagined either. This is the moment where the mind begins asking a dangerous question. What if the limitation is not outside me? Most people resist this question because answering it honestly forces the collapse of every comfortable excuse. But once the question appears clearly enough, it refuses to disappear. And that is when the break point begins. At first the realization feels subtle. You begin observing your own thinking. You notice how often doubt appears the moment ambition rises. You notice how quickly fear suggests caution when an opportunity demands courage. You notice how easily the mind begins explaining why something may not work. These thoughts once seemed harmless. Now they begin looking suspicious. You start recognizing something unsettling. Your mind has been rehearsing limitation for years, not loudly, quietly, in moments when no one else was listening. This is the point where external blame begins dissolving, because you begin seeing the cause and effect pattern clearly. Thought, belief, behavior, result. The chain is unmistakable. Repeated thoughts about limitation become belief. Belief quietly directs behavior. Behavior produces results that reinforce the belief. The cycle closes perfectly. Once the mind sees this cycle clearly, something uncomfortable happens. Responsibility expands. You can no longer pretend the world is the primary architect of your life. You begin recognizing the role your thinking has played in shaping every decision, every hesitation, every delay. And with that recognition comes a deeper realization. Your thoughts have not been random. They have been forming an identity, an internal story about who you are and what kind of life is possible for you. That story influences every choice you make. It determines how boldly you act, how long you persist, how much success feels natural or uncomfortable. Now pause here for a moment, because the next truth arrives slowly. Many people secretly fear becoming more than their environment expects, not consciously, but deeply. Success introduces visibility, responsibility, criticism, and the mind, trained for years to avoid discomfort, quietly resists those conditions. This resistance explains something that confuses many hardworking individuals. They approach opportunity, then retreat. They begin ambitious plans, then abandon them. They step close to transformation, then return to familiar patterns. From the outside, this behavior appears inconsistent. From the inside, it feels justified, because the identity built from years of thinking is defending itself. Your subconscious mind values stability more than ambition. It prefers the familiar over the unknown. And if your thoughts have trained it to believe that success belongs to other people, it will quietly protect that belief through hesitation, through doubt, through delay. Now consider something that few people notice about the individuals who build extraordinary lives. At some moment, often invisible to others, they cross a psychological line, a line separating drifting from direction. Before that moment, they wrestle with the same doubts everyone experiences. But once that line is crossed, something inside them changes. They stop negotiating with fear. They stop allowing doubt to vote on their decisions. They make a final commitment about the direction of their lives. This commitment does not eliminate obstacles, but it removes uncertainty about identity. They know who they are becoming, and once that identity is chosen deliberately, the mind reorganizes itself around it. Napoleon Hill observed this pattern repeatedly while studying powerful figures of industry and leadership. Consider Henry Ford. His vision of affordable automobiles was dismissed by many intelligent observers. Yet Ford's thinking had already crossed the breakpoint. The doubts of others could not redirect his internal command. Or consider Thomas Edison. Years of failed experiments could have easily reinforced the belief that success was unlikely. But Edison had already established a mental identity aligned with invention. Failure did not change that identity. It simply became part of the process. This is the critical difference. Before the breakpoint, thoughts shape identity. After the breakpoint, identity shapes thoughts. The mind begins filtering ideas differently. Negative assumptions are rejected more quickly. Fearful predictions lose authority. Ambitious thoughts are reinforced deliberately. This is when the discipline of guarding thoughts begins transforming into something more powerful, mental command. But reaching this stage requires a difficult admission. You must acknowledge that many of the thoughts you have repeated for years were not neutral. They were instructions that shaped your current identity, instructions that limited your expectations, instructions that trained your mind to hesitate at critical moments. And once this realization becomes undeniable, the mind faces a decision: continue protecting the old identity, or construct a new one deliberately. That decision is not simple, because constructing a new identity requires something most people have never practiced consistently. Control over thought. Not occasional control, constant control. Every idea entering the mind must be examined. Every repeated belief must be chosen carefully. Because once you understand the power of thought, allowing it to drift becomes dangerous. And that realization creates tension. A tension between the person you have been and the person you now recognize you could become. Many people retreat at this stage. They return to familiar thinking because it feels safer. But those who move forward begin discovering something remarkable. Thoughts can be trained. Beliefs can be rewritten. Identity itself can be reconstructed. And once that reconstruction begins, something unexpected happens. Fear slowly loses its grip. Not because circumstances improve, because the mind has begun replacing fear with something stronger. A force capable of guiding thought even in moments of uncertainty. A force that transforms hesitation into disciplined action. That force has been misunderstood for generations, yet it remains the central power behind every life that rises beyond limitation. It is not optimism, it is not wishful thinking, it is something far more deliberate.
And once you understand how it is built, guarding your thoughts becomes the most powerful discipline you will ever practice. But the process of building that force requires a mental structure most people have never created before. And without that structure, the mind slowly drifts back toward its old habits, which raises a question that determines whether transformation truly begins. If your thoughts have been shaping your identity for years, how do you begin reshaping them on purpose?
Once the break point is crossed, the mind encounters a strange emptiness. Not peace, not relief, just silence. Because the old explanations no longer hold. Blame for circumstances fades. Excuses lose authority. The comfort of "I tried" no longer satisfies. This emptiness is dangerous. Many retreat here. They cling to drifting because direction now feels heavy, demanding, uncomfortable. But those who move forward begin building something the average mind never does: a replacement. The replacement is not optimism, it is not hope. It is a deliberate construction of thought, a mental framework that guides identity instead of allowing identity to be shaped by circumstance. Napoleon Hill insisted this process begins with definiteness of purpose, not a vague ambition, not a general desire to succeed, a clearly defined objective that your mind can focus on relentlessly. Every thought, every action, every decision must orbit this purpose. Without it, drifting reasserts itself quietly, insidiously. But purpose alone is not enough. It must be reinforced with faith. Faith is often misunderstood. It is not naive hope. It is trained certainty. Through autosuggestion, thoughts are repeated deliberately, repeated with emotional intensity, repeated until the subconscious begins to accept them as truth. Most people repeat negative autosuggestion unknowingly. I can't do this. I'm not enough. I'll fail like last time. These statements quietly construct identity. They make hesitation automatic. They make procrastination justified. They make fear the default advisor. Faith reverses that process. It becomes a tool to overwrite habitual limitations, a mental command that says, "This is who I am. This is what I do." But there is another layer, the mastermind principle, rarely discussed outside the study of extraordinary individuals. Even the most determined minds of history surrounded themselves with aligned thinkers. Carnegie had advisors. Edison had collaborators. Ford had engineers who shared his vision. Why? Because belief reinforced by others strengthens the mind's alignment with purpose. Ideas expand faster. Action gains energy. Fear loses its authority more quickly. Now consider the role of self-discipline. Faith and purpose provide direction. Mastermind association amplifies strength. But discipline is the gatekeeper. It is the force that executes, even when fear whispers. Most people imagine discipline as strictness or punishment. It is not. Discipline is choice. The deliberate decision to act in alignment with purpose, regardless of fear. Here is the danger. Fear will always arise. It will speak louder when stakes increase. It will question your readiness. It will remind you of past failures. And if the mind is untrained, if the gateway is unguarded, fear regains control. Drifting returns quietly. Progress stalls. Potential recedes. The replacement prevents this, because a mind aligned with purpose, reinforced with faith, supported by aligned thinkers, and disciplined through daily action, becomes nearly invincible. The law of attraction, as misunderstood by many, is responding now, not to luck, not to wishful thinking. It responds to alignment. The subconscious identity, aligned with deliberate thought, sends signals into the environment, signals of consistency, signals of execution, signals that draw opportunities, ideas, and allies toward the aligned individual. And yet, even here, transformation is incomplete if vigilance is not constant. Alignment is not permanent. Discipline is not automatic. Fear will test you daily. Habits of drifting may attempt to reclaim control during moments of fatigue or distraction. That is the subtle power of the replacement. It is not a momentary change. It is a lifelong architecture of mind, a structure where thoughts, beliefs, and actions are deliberately chosen, where hesitation is measured, fear is acknowledged but not obeyed, and identity is consciously shaped. Few people build this framework. Even fewer maintain it consistently, and those who do begin operating in a reality that seems almost effortless. They act decisively. They recognize opportunity instantly. They attract support from unexpected directions. Their thoughts no longer betray them. Their minds serve them instead of controlling them. This is the hidden mastery few achieve. It is not flashy. It does not announce itself. It does not feel dramatic. Yet it changes everything, because when thoughts are guarded and deliberately replaced with disciplined, aligned thinking, fear loses its authority permanently. Hesitation becomes rare. Procrastination becomes meaningless. Ambition is no longer optional. It is inevitable. And now, something remarkable emerges. The mind becomes a quiet force of influence, a signal in the environment that draws results toward it without struggle. A person's identity now dictates the world's response. But even here, a question remains unresolved for most. What does it truly take to maintain this alignment when every day presents new fears, distractions, and doubts? Once alignment is established, something subtle begins to occur. Not noise, not applause, not external validation. A quiet power forms. It is not visible to most people. It cannot be measured in wealth or position alone. It is recognized in the way decisions are made, the way action flows, the way obstacles are met without internal hesitation. At first it feels strange, because for years you may have believed success is dramatic, loud, immediate, obvious, but true mastery is the opposite. It is stillness under pressure, direction without panic, the ability to act decisively while others hesitate. Consider the pattern: a mind that guards its thoughts, that aligns purpose with faith, that strengthens itself with disciplined action, begins to operate differently. The subconscious mind no longer battles the conscious mind. Fear has lost its authority. Procrastination has no shelter. Habit serves growth, not limitation. Now observe the consequence. Opportunities are no longer random. They arrive consistently. Allies are no longer coincidental. They gravitate naturally toward alignment. Your influence grows quietly, steadily, without the desperate effort many mistake for success. Napoleon Hill studied individuals who mastered this dynamic. Carnegie did not stumble into wealth. He methodically built influence. Ford did not experiment blindly. He executed a vision relentlessly, even when critics laughed. Edison did not invent by luck. He allowed repeated failure to reinforce identity, not diminish it. All of them understood a principle rarely taught. The outer world mirrors the inner self. Your environment, your results, your influence. These are not independent. They are reflections of disciplined, guarded, purposeful thought. And here is the final truth most people never see. The law of attraction is not magic. It is alignment. The alignment of thought, belief, and identity over time. Once that alignment is achieved, the world begins responding with precision. Yet even this quiet power requires maintenance. Guarding thoughts is not a one-time act. It is constant vigilance. Every distraction, every careless repetition of fear-based thinking threatens to unravel it, and the moment it does, drifting reappears. But the person who has crossed the breakpoint, who has deliberately replaced old patterns, who has constructed disciplined alignment, recognizes the signs immediately. Hesitation becomes visible, doubt becomes audible, procrastination becomes intolerable, and action restores balance, not through force, not through struggle, but through deliberate mental command. The result is a life that feels inevitable, not because the world is controlled, not because luck favors you, but because your inner self has become the authority. Your decisions follow your identity. Your energy aligns with purpose. Your influence attracts opportunity. Your life no longer drifts. And in that quiet alignment, you find something even greater than success. Certainty, not arrogance, not the illusion of control. A calm knowledge that your mind, your choices, and your actions are no longer being hijacked by fear, habit, or unexamined thinking. This certainty transforms every interaction, every challenge, every potential setback. You operate in the world with a consistency and force few recognize but all sense. Influence becomes natural. Power becomes invisible. Success becomes a reflection, not a pursuit. At this stage, a person no longer asks, "Will I succeed?" They ask, "What is the next deliberate step?" And every answer is available because the mind has been organized deliberately. The thoughts are guarded. The purpose is aligned. The faith is reinforced. Discipline executes flawlessly. This is the ultimate form of the law of attraction. Not wishing for things, not hoping circumstances will improve, not reacting to opportunities, but deliberately becoming a person who attracts outcomes because the mind itself has been transformed, and the transformation is permanent. Not because the world changes, but because you have changed. The drifting, fearful, reactive mind is gone. In its place stands a disciplined, purpose-driven, quiet force, invisible to most, unstoppable to those who understand the law that has always been in operation. And from this point forward, life obeys the identity you have chosen. Everything else becomes a reflection, a life of quiet power, of consistent results, of inevitable influence, and of permanent alignment with the forces that govern success itself. Because the greatest secret was never in luck. It was always inside you. The mind, guarded, disciplined, purposeful, the mind that determines everything,